Hello! Welcome to A Witch's Yarn, a mystical book club led by your host, Esther Dawn. In this podcast, we explore questions about the world of witchcraft and paganism through reading and research. Each episode, we read and discuss a multitude of topics, from deity worship to spellcraft. So grab a cozy beverage, get settled in your favorite chair, pick up your craft of choice, and join me as I tell you a witch's yarn. Hello again, and welcome to this third episode of A Witch's Yarn. I'm your host, Esther Dawn, and this is my third time recording this introduction because first my cat was being very loud and then my husband was being very loud, so now we're here. So today we're going to be reading Frejya Through Persephone. Now, I did say last episode that we were going to do 5 per episode, but then I told you Frejya Through Persephone, which is only Freyja, Hecate, Apollo, and Persephone. So that was my bad. Don't worry about Lucifer. We will pick him up next week. We'll do 6 next week. We'll do Lucifer through Archangel Raphael. But this week, just so you know, my craft of choice is tatting. I am tatting myself a choker in honor of Caridwen. I am sitting in my cozy, comfy glider that I've had since, well, technically has been around since before I was born. And I am just drinking a strawberry kiwi Propel, because it just sounded really good. You're probably going to hear some cat noises because last week I told you that we are fostering a kitty named Wyvern, and he is starting to come out of his shell and be very playful. Because he's only a kitten, he's only 6 months old, and he likes to run around like crazy and play with things. So if you hear cats running, I'm going to try to keep the noise down as much as possible, but that's what's going on. He also really loves to get on our cat Chai's nerves and try to bat at her, but I'm pretty sure she is downstairs, so hopefully there won't be any fights while I'm recording. So yeah, I think we'll just go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with Freyja. Now, Freyja is a Norse goddess. She is the second Norse deity that Sara interviews in this book. She's super cool. She's got cats that pull her chariot. She's a goddess of war and love, which you see a lot, actually. Last week I talked about how some people try to shoehorn others or gods into certain roles, and this is one of those examples where a lot of people are like, well, Freyja is the same as Aphrodite, is the same as this and that, because they're both goddesses of love and another aspect, and you can't do that. They're similar, but they're not the same. And yeah, anyway, so Freyja is a Norse goddess of love and war. There's a quote on page 42 where Sara says, "Turns out magic was considered women's domain in Norse culture, which is incredible. It wasn't something feared but respected, and yet also looked down on as emasculating and shameful when men did it, as is predictable, but still disheartening." So Sara's, she's this interesting goddess. So we'll just get right into the interview. So her first question is, why use cats to pull your chariot? And I think that's such a fun question. Because seriously, like, you would expect horses or at least mules or something, but no, just straight up cats, which is like, I know in Norse culture, when people got married, it was traditional to gift the woman a kitten. So cats and kittens were kind of an important part of Norse culture. But she's basically like, I wanted them. They're smart, they're clever, they're fun, but I just wanted cats. And I said, in my fun little notebook, you're probably still going to hear pages turning, but hopefully you won't hear as much of my computer fan going crazy because I've moved it. So hopefully that will help. All right, so I said, I love that she uses cats to pull her chariot because she recognizes their strength and cleverness despite their cuteness. So yeah, I think it's really, really interesting that she has cats pull her chariot, because that's not something that I would ever think of as, you know, a chariot animal. You know the expression herding cats. I can't imagine having them drive your chariot. So, all right, number 2, Sarah asked, how do love and war fit together? And I'm going to make this quote a bit more palatable because I'm trying to keep this PG, just because if by some off chance someone in real life finds me that I don't necessarily, you know, I'm halfway in the broom closet still, but I just want to make sure that this is PG. And so I will read the quote from page 44, but I am going to edit it because, yeah. Freyja essentially says, let me be clear, the urge to fight and the urge to copulate are not so separate at their core. So there's actually a biblical verse that was turned into a Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel, for everything there's a season. And Freyja basically reminds us, like, there's a time for war and a time for love, and we need both in moderation. On page 45, there's a quote, unchecked urges lead to quite the stupid decision. And it was in reference to, there's a myth where, there are 2 versions of a myth, where Freyja loves this necklace that these dwarves have. And so the question was whether she was bewitched or whether she just fell in love with the necklace. Not fell in love, like, physically, but, like, thought it was beautiful and wanted it. There's kind of a was she bewitched, and kind of the feeling I got, at least from Sarah's interpretation of her readings, is if she was in fact bewitched, and that love of objects, of wealth, led her to a really awful situation. So yeah, moderation is super important, especially when you're dealing with things like love, things like war. I can't help but be reminded of our current situation in the real world, where we've got people trying to show how big they are and how powerful they are, despite the fact that the majority of people under them don't want what's going to happen. And so we're scared, we're nervous, and yeah, there is no moderation right now. It's just plain old, we're going to fight because we want to show how big and bad we are. So that's where my brain goes with that. Okay. Number 3, Sarah asks, what was it like to be hated to be remembered? And this again goes back to the whole, it's so interesting to see how different deities were remembered in different ways. Like, Freyja was basically remembered as this harlot, and it's so hard because, like, she's a goddess. Why would you treat a goddess that way? But then you have to remember, like, the people who were spreading Christianity were doing it to have control. A lot of times people who are spreading Christianity weren't doing it because they actually wanted to try to help their neighbors, try to promote love and peace and whatever. They were doing it strictly because they wanted power, and they realized that forcing people under their wing and to change their religion despite what they wanted was a good way to do it. And so to do that, they had to demonize a lot of these gods and goddesses, because otherwise these people would be like, well, why would I want to worship your God when my God does this, that, and the other, and is a kind, loving God to their people? So Freyja, she's like, she was basically like, I wasn't allowed in the church. And they weren't allowed to, my people weren't allowed to see me as more than just a lustful woman. And so it sucked, essentially. And so what I wrote was, I hate that Freyja had to endure such scorn to be remembered, especially if the myth that she was bewitched is true. It reminds me of Mary Magdalene, who we will get to in a couple episodes. And I've read her interview, like just a couple days ago, and it made me cry. So, yeah, reminds me of Mary Magdalene, because Mary Magdalene, fun fact, we'll get more into this in a couple weeks, but she was just labeled a prostitute by a pope. There was no evidence, but this pope correlated her with an unnamed woman who was a prostitute in the Bible, and he was like, oh, this person, Mary Magdalene, were the same. And I personally, my feelings aside on sex work, I think they're valid. I think that they deserve to be protected. But in this culture where that was considered such an abomination, to be reduced, to be turned into something that you're not, especially something that was so frowned upon, just because a pope said so, and it was believed for 600 years. It's gross. It's gross and it's unfair. But yeah, so I said it reminded me of Mary Magdalene, which, again, we'll get into, because if I get started on that, I will just go on a rant. And you guys, I'm hoping you can already tell by the fact that my last episode was over an hour long, is I do enjoy talking. I don't know how to shut up sometimes. Anyway, number 4 is, Sara asks, what do you think of today's Christian Scandinavians? And the thing that I really took about it was, Freyja has kind of shifted as time has gone on, and she says, I don't blame God. I hated what happened. I hated what I was turned into. But essentially she's like, I don't blame God. And there's a quote on page 47. I'm doing lots of quotes this week because I just think they're really, really good. God isn't a God that's supposed to be forced on people that don't want to follow him. I'm going to say that again, because it's important. God isn't a God that's supposed to be forced on people that don't want to follow him. Taking this as someone who was raised evangelical Christian, you're told, well, you have to preach and you have to proselytize and share the word because you don't want your friends going to hell. That's not what God wants. At least from Freyja's understanding, and at least from Sara's understanding, and from my understanding, God wants to be loved because you choose to, not because you feel you have to save yourself from damnation. Okay, and it's great that came up specifically in Freyja's interview, because again, it reinforces that idea that the gods talk together and they work together. But yeah, so Freyja, Sara, we all think God doesn't want to be forced on people who don't want to worship him. And that's what ended up happening with the Roman Empire. When they came and they spread the empire, they also spread, after Constantine, they spread this religion And it was rough. It was hard on these people, because I think I talked about it last week, how you have these people who are like, oh, this was stolen, that was stolen, when in reality what was happening was pagans were finding ways to worship their gods under the radar. And when you have that forced nature, it's just, it isn't out of love, it's out of duty. And I don't think God wants that. Anyway. Question 5. So, Sara says, how do you see yourself? And Frejya is another deity. We had this with Hades. Another, for lack of a better term, human-ish. I'm going to get that on a t-shirt. Human-ish. Human-ish god that basically admits to have made a mistake, like the way that she allowed herself to be portrayed over time was as someone who was a scorned woman. You know, she to be remembered, she took on this hated role, and she regrets that. And so I wrote, another example of a quote-unquote human deity that admits to flaws. She was stubborn. She was trying to cling to the past. Number 6. Sara says, how do you want others to view you? And the quote on page 49 is, as an entity that represents mistakes and learning from them. And again, that's just so crazy to me, because I do this a lot because, you know, from my own experience, right? I grew up with the thought that God is this unchanging being. He was, he is to come. He doesn't change. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't, this is according to modern evangelical Christianity. He's this unchanging being, this all-powerful being. And so when you hear of a God that's like admitting to mistakes and I've grown, I've changed, I want that to be part of the aspect of how I'm worshipped now, is this deity who has made mistakes and learned from them. That's really hard to take as someone who grew up evangelically Christian, because we see, it's like we're taught, or at least I was taught, that growing up and making mistakes was a sin. If you made a mistake, you were wrong, you did something horrible, and you need to repent of it. And so seeing this goddess say, I made a mistake, I want people to recognize that I'm a being who made mistakes, that's so wild to me in such a positive way. It's like, oh my gosh, a deity made mistakes? Anyway, number 7, Sara asks, what do you want your followers to know? And this one gave me chills. She says, and I quote from page 49, I'm coming, she hissed, a fiery eye fixed on me. I have tests. I will always have tests. And I wrote, that seems ominous. Frejya seems like a goddess I would not, and I underlined not, want to cross. But yeah, so I'm morbidly curious about what kind of test she has. I don't think that the Norse pantheon is particularly interested in me, and while I love, I mentioned this with Loki's interview, while I love the stories of the Norse pantheon, I don't think that I'm called to work with them, but I am so curious what in the world she means by I'm coming. Ooh, chills. Okay. Number 8. How is your relationship with the Norse gods? And she's basically like, we have fun. Well, if you know her history, she was basically married off into the Aesir, which is kind of a common theme in a lot of mythology, just based on the time period and, you know, how relationships were seen to have worked back then. But yeah, so she's basically like, it was hard. We had some struggles in the beginning, but like, we have fun. Especially she talks about Thor trying to get his hammer back from, I think it was dwarves, it could have been giants. I think it was a giant, actually. I don't know. Anyway, but she's like, yeah, we have fun. And I just said, it amazes me how human the gods seem. And I think that's fair. Again, human-ish. Like, Lord knows that we're not going around, you know, doing the things that the gods do. That's my cat again. But there's still, again, I can't say people. They're not people, they're gods. People-ish, human-ish. They have feelings and emotions, and they show them in human-ish ways. And I think that's so, so cool. Number 9 was, how did your relationship with Odin develop? So basically, and especially this goes back to the fact that she wanted this necklace so badly because at least according to this set of interviews, she was basically bewitched into wanting this necklace so badly that she cheated essentially on Odin, is what I gather. And she's basically like, I didn't trust him, but we fell in love. But then things changed because of what happened with the dwarves. And I just, as someone who has had relationships that were repaired after bad things happened. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Oh my God, my cat. One of my books is on the ground now because he wants to go play in my altar. Yes, I hear you, Wyvern. Anyway, but as someone who's dealt with that kind of pain, like, your relationship grows and you do heal, but it doesn't stay the same, you know, and no matter how much you love that person, sometimes there's just that little of pain that happens. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I wrote, I appreciate the idea that Freyja reminds us that love isn't always sunshine and rainbows. And that was the interview with Freyja, and basically what I said was, overall thoughts. Freyja is a goddess who has changed since her old stories, and I really do think that that's such a cool thing to think about, of gods and goddesses just changing over time, just like humans do. Like, you grow to like things or dislike things, or you become more wise because you've had more experience. And gods do the same thing, apparently, and I think that's fantastic. Okay. That's one interview down. 3 to go. We get into 3... Excuse me. 3 really big hitters. So, and they're all Greek. So we go from Hecate to Apollo to Persephone. And Persephone is the last Greek deity that we'll get to read on in this book. And we'll see why. If you've read, I really hope you're reading this along with me, because again, there are spoilers. It's meant to be a dialogue. It's not meant to be me just reading the book to you. So I hope you're reading it along with me. But I think Hecate, but yeah, what was I saying? Oh gosh. Yeah, I want you to read this along with me because I don't want to spoil everything. But we'll see why, if you haven't read it already, we'll see why Persephone is Sarah's last interview with a Greek deity. So I'm going to start out with a quote on page 52. Sara says, but because while Hecate is a goddess of witchcraft and magic, she is not the only one. For example, you have Isis. For example, in my pantheon, my goddess that I'm currently making jewelry for, Ceridwen is considered a goddess of magic. And I also looked up Heka versus Hecate because that comes up later. And that was something that happened in kind of her introduction. And I said, look up Heka versus Hecate. And I said, a brief Google search shows that there might be a connection between the Egyptian Heka and the Greek Hecate. Apparently Heka was an Egyptian god of magic. There might have been, there's also a couple other ideas of connections between Hecate and other deities in other pantheons, which when we get to one of her questions, number 2, I believe, so when we get to number 2, I'll tell you why I brought that up. I wrote a lot for this one, specifically because there were some things I didn't understand, and so these next few might be a little longer just because I love the Greek deities, and oh boy, these interviews. Anyway, I also said, Sara reminds us again that the Greek pantheon has certain expectations when it comes to being called upon. This is important. Do not, or I would recommend, I'm not a Hellenistic worshiper, but from what I've gathered, not just from Sara, but from other Hellenistic worshippers, is that you don't just come in wrinkly clothes and having not washed your hands and not giving the proper obeisance. You have to actually go through the proper steps. So that's just my 2 cents there. If you're thinking about working with a Greek deity and you're listening to my podcast, I highly recommend you go read Hellenistic books. I have one. It's going to be the 3rd book we read. We're going to be on this one for a while, though. So do your own research outside of just the briefest research on Google. Like, do your best to find legitimately Hellenistic resources. Anyway. So the first question Sara asks is a personal question. She had a photo shoot where she was dressed as the goddess Hecate. And essentially she was like, this outfit that I made kept falling down, and she kind of prayed to Hecate saying, please don't let this fall off me unless you want a different kind of photo shoot. And she just wanted to know, what did you think of the photo shoot? How did it go? And Hecate is like, it's cute. But then she just straight up calls Sara out. She's like, well, if you weren't happy with how you looked, you should have done something about it. And I'm just like, ouch. And from what I've read and from what I've seen and heard from worshippers who worship Hecate is she does not pull punches. She's not one. There was a thing on TikTok recently. There was a creator who was like, Hecate scared me and I went back to being a Christian. I'm not going to name names. I don't even know her name. But if you're going to work with these gods, you have to understand, they're gods, they're goddesses. They don't pull punches. And apparently, Hecate especially does not pull punches. But yeah, so again, she was like, yeah, you could, it was fun, it was cute, but if you were unhappy with how you looked in it, that was on you. Ouch. Number 2 was, how did you come to the Greek pantheon? And this is where she said, essentially there was, I'm not going to rehash it for you, but essentially she was like, oh yeah, I followed a boy. I'm like, isn't that how all adventure stories start? I followed someone. It isn't, but it kind of feels that way. But I did some more research, and I said I wasn't able to find any information about Hecate following someone to Greece. But with the travel that happened at that time, and the way syncretism works, it's entirely possible she followed someone from somewhere, Egypt or Anatolia or otherwise. So I'm not saying this to discredit Sara, because I only did, again, a very brief Google search. But what I found that didn't mention that, which is not to say that Sara's wrong, it's just saying I can't verify it. Does that make sense? Like, I don't. But, and also, on page 55, she's like, well, what did the boy want? And, of course, Hecate's like, power. He wanted to, the quote is, he wanted power to tame the sun, to be more than all the heavens, and I would not do that for him or anyone, so he decided he had no use for me. Which, I mean, fair. Like, if you're going to be a magician, that does not make us gods. We're still human. We still have human abilities. Yeah, so I always try to think of that is just because we have magic. Magic, I think, is innate in all things, personally. That doesn't mean that we can be more than the rules of nature. And we'll get more into that with Persephone as well. Alright, so number 3. Man, I've spent a lot of time just talking about that because she's so cool. Anyway. Number 3 was, why get involved with the plight of others? Specifically, she's talking about Persephone and Demeter. And I said, she makes it clear that Hades and Persephone need each other, but she didn't know what was truly happening and decided to help Demeter. Another reminder that the gods act in their own times. Zeus was acting like a Greek king, gifting his daughter to another Greek king. So important. So, while, for the most part, okay, I literally just saw a TikTok about this. It's like TikTok knows I'm going to be recording podcasts. But there was a Hellenistic creator who I've just now followed, and I can't remember her name. I feel really bad about it. But she was talking about how you can't take the myths too literally, but at the same time you can't totally disregard them. You can't swing too much in either way, otherwise you become extreme. But you also have to remember that, yes, wyvern. Sorry, cats are confusing. You can't swing too far one way or the other. These gods are gods, and they but they're also products of the people that worshipped them in a way. Like, I'm not saying they're egregores, but they served a certain people at a certain time and behaved in a certain way that those people would expect them to behave. I think that's the way I wanted to word that, yeah. So, Zeus is the king of the gods, of all the gods. Hades is the king of the underworld. Poseidon is the king of the sea, right? These are all kings in their own right. So, in that time period, well into the Middle Ages and even further, it was expected of a king to use his children for political alliances, right? So Zeus was acting as a Greek king, doing what a Greek king does, gifting daughters to allies, which is not to say that what he did was morally right, necessarily, but he was doing what was expected of him at the time, gifting a princess to another king, essentially. And that's just kind of where that's where I wanted to go with that, because I think just that reminder is important, because I don't want people to be like, Zeus was this horrible, horrible god, and he doesn't deserve worship. Like, that's not how it worked back then. It's just not how it worked back then. Anyway, so yeah. Number 4, why fight against the Titans if you're a Titan? And I'm just like, Hecate comes across as really pragmatic. She's fighting with the winning side. She knew what was coming. She knew, what was going to happen. And she wanted, she knew what was going to happen. And she chose the winning side. And I think that's totally fair. And also, like, the way she talks, at least in this interview, is, I didn't like what the Titans were doing. So, yeah. Okay, here's another thing I had to Google. So do you have any relation to the Watchers? And my first thought was Marvel, right? Which is not what Sara was talking about. The Watchers are a group. Okay. Google search says Watchers are a type of angels, some of whom fell from heaven for sleeping with human women. They also gave humans knowledge, and that came from Wikipedia. So Hecate says she's similar, but she didn't overstep her bounds. She shares her magic with humanity. So she is similar in that role. And then she says on page 57, they saw magic as a shortcut to power and glory rather than the delicate and specific tool that it is, Hecate continued. And they wasted their lives looking for more power, always turning over every stone to find something better than what they had in order to become the most powerful of all. Hoo boy. So, power hungry. She's saying, I gave them these tools and they squandered them, or they became too intense with them. Number 6. What has you so active among witches in the modern era? This one, I feel like this is another one where the gods are talking directly to me. Okay, fine, I'm listening, I promise. But Hecate, and I've seen this too, and I've been guilty of this too. Hecate's like, you've got to stop relying on your gift, on magic to try to fix your problems. Like, magic is a tool. But again, we go back to what I said last week. Magic without mundane effort doesn't lead to anything. Is useless. So I said Hecate is telling us we need to confront our hurts instead of just trying to wash over them with magic. Because they'll still be there. Like, you can't just do a cord cutting and bye-bye, everything's fine. That's not how it works. Cord cuttings are powerful workings, and they can help. But again, like, if you don't do the effort that it actually requires, are you actually... What's the use of the herbs and the magic if you don't put mundane effort behind it? And that's kind of what Hecate is saying. And I agree, even though it's hard, because, man, it would be so easy to just snap that away and gone. Poof, it's gone. Okay, number 7. Why is witchcraft reviving in full force in society? And she says it's a tool that we're starting to remember exists and we're using it. And it's not always for the right reasons. Again, I get the sense of power, absolute power, or power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I forget who said that. But I think it's a great quote. Power, which is not to say that every powerful person is corrupt. Looking at our government, a lot of them are. But, if you use the tools in the wrong way, you're just going to end up hurting yourself, is essentially what I got from that. And then, how do you see yourself? And she's regretful. Like, she's got regrets. I've made mistakes. But she says, I've got no choice but to continue now. And essentially, I said, it's hard to imagine a god or goddess having regret or feelings as though feeling as though they've made a mistake. It can be unnerving, an unnerving thought, especially if you grew up evangelical like I did. So I talked about this before with Freyja. I'm not going to talk about it again. But it can really be unnerving to hear a god or read a god saying, yeah, I made a mistake. I feel regret about it. When you grow up thinking your God is all powerful and never makes mistakes. Number 9. How do you want others to see you? Like everyone so far, she's loving. She remains in the present. So yeah, I didn't really have much to say about that one. And then 10, any last messages? She says, I'll tell them myself. And I'm like, oh, just like Freyja kind of gave me the chills, this one gave me the chills too. And from what I've seen, Hecate is not afraid to communicate with her followers. And again, this comes from that woman who was like, I was working with Hecate, and essentially, she didn't say it like this, but she's like, I think she was like, something demonic happened, but essentially, she got told to do shadow work, and something happened, and it was frightening to her, and so she's like, I'm going to be a Christian now. But yeah, so just, if you're going to be working with these gods, they're going to talk back to you. It's okay. My impression of Hecate was a goddess who gives us tools and wants us to use them well. Alright, so that's Hecate. We're halfway through. This next one's a doozy. Finally, we're at Apollo. There are some other really interesting interviews. Like when we get to, like I said, Mary Magdalene. She's great. Her interview is fantastic and made me cry. I'm reading Jesus's interview right now. He's great. I'm really looking forward to seeing Judas Iscariot's interview because I never would have thought to interview him. If you're not familiar with Christian mythology, Judas was the apostle who betrayed Jesus, and I'm like, how is that interview going to work? So I'm super, super excited to read that one, but that's a while away from us here. Now we're at Apollo, and my first note is literally just, oh dear. Because again, I really hope you've read this. Because there's about to be a ton of spoilers. It did not go well. And I said, good reminder to check your resources. Hey, I can help with that. Literally, my whole job with this podcast is we're going to verify resources. We're going to read them. We're going to dissect them so that if this is something you're interested in, you actually understand. We understand together. Again, this is a podcast where I'm hoping you'll communicate back. I've yet to have any communication. I would love to hear from you. But yeah, so, and then I said, what I love about Sara is that she takes accountability. Like, she flat out owns up to the fact, I made a mistake. I royally screwed up this interview. And it led to some not great things, which she'll talk about in Persephone's interview when we get there. But yeah. So, number 1, what do you love about music? Even from the very beginning, she's like, I associated him more heavily with the sun, when that's only one small aspect of what he does. But she does ask about music, and I'm a musician, so I loved this question. I said, oh no, that's wrong. I'm on the wrong one. Apollo uses music to express himself, and I love that because that's why I love music too. Music is such a powerful communicator. Oh gosh, who was it? Someone said, when words fail, music speaks. And it's so overquoted, but I love it. It's overquoted for a reason. Oh, there's a cat. But yeah, so Apollo as a god of music, it's just so humbling to read that he loves music for the same reason I do. Yeah. Number 2 is, she says, she asks him, why do you have so many lovers in your myths? And she says, I didn't really mean to say it that way, but words matter. She says, what she meant makes sense. What I said is what she meant makes sense. And she said, in hindsight, this was a ridiculous question, but I think what I meant to ask was more, if they kept causing such tragedy for him, these mortal lovers especially, why did he keep choosing them? But that's not what she said. So you have to remember to watch your words in the presence of the gods. And he's like, humans come and go, they happen. But then he asks her a question, and that's when things start going off the rails. He asks why she does this interview, and she's like, well, I just think it's really interesting and really cool. And he's like, essentially like, so you're coming here to, oh gosh, what was the quote? He said, on page 64, so you want to walk into as many castles as you please without having to worship their kings. Yeah. Yeah. So he shows his anger about not being treated with the respect and obeisance he's used to. And he starts getting angry. And then Sara, oh gosh, she says something, and I literally, in the book, I just wrote girl with 3 exclamation points. She just said, "We are equals," I snapped. "I do not worship my equals." And I just wrote, girl. Yeah, Sara says she's equal to him, still under the impression that the gods are lesser. God protects her in that moment, but as we'll see in the next interview, hopefully you've read it, he does, but he doesn't. And then on 65, there's another quote. Where I went wrong was denying that these other gods had any divinity at all, denying their place in the hierarchy of spirits that keep the world in check. Moving forward, I thought these great spirits were important and had their role, but were ultimately not so different from humans, who were also extremely divine and powerful in their own right. This was the arrogance I'd been approaching all of these gods with until this point, and I'm surprised it took this long to catch up with me. Whew. Oof. Yeah, Apollo was not happy. So, the next question was, what do you think about God and Christianity? And essentially, what I got was, Apollo seems to resent how his role was reduced to a collection of myths. He may be a little bitter and happy to see paganism returning. It doesn't seem like he necessarily resents God, at least not anymore. But it definitely does feel like he was unhappy for a long time, and he still carries some of that unhappiness. And he's glad to see that he's starting to get the respect that he feels he deserves, now that people are starting to become Hellenistic worshippers. Here's another one that's going to cause me to rant a little bit. Number 4. There's a statue of Apollo in the Vatican. The Vatican has a lot, well, Rome in general has a lot of statuary and idols from other cultures. Egyptian, Greek especially. Of course, there are Roman statues, which of course that would have just been from the Roman Empire, so that's one thing. But yeah, so I literally wrote, I have thoughts with an exclamation point and underlined. And I said, I hate that so many cultures have been separated from their cultures as a form of conquest. They're reduced from religious iconography to pretty statues. Yeah. So So we see that a lot with, again, the Greek statues. There, I don't remember. There's a group of goddesses, and there are 8 of them in Greece and 1 in Britain. And Britain is refusing to return that statue to Greece where it belongs. And that's just one example. But we've turned they're literally like pieces of worship, like they're representation of these people's gods. And they're turned into just these pretty statues. And that drives me insane, especially now that I'm a witch. It made me mad before, but now it makes me really mad because you're taking away their heritage. And you're, it's not really that important. We've got it. It's the same thing that happened in Rome, or in Egypt, for a long time, before the Egypt government kind of took over. But people would just take mummies and sell them and grind them up into powder and put them in medicines. Like, people literally ate mummies because they thought they had rejuvenating properties. Gross. Because they had no respect for other culture. And this idea of cultural appreciation is so new, and I don't understand it, because I, as someone who loves history and someone who loves culture and learns to love about other things and other places, seeing that happen just drives me up a wall. Now, this is my rant for today. Be respectful. If you're going to a place to study and to learn and to be an archaeologist, be respectful of that culture. That thing in the ground belongs to that culture. It just does. That's my rant on that. So, but that, not really the point of that, but yeah. So again, so the gods, while the gods tend to work together, they can still get on each other's nerves. Something that I thought was kind of funny is, like, she has this really vivid image of him smirking when she asks about that. And he's like, on page 66, he says, "I think I'm a thorn in God's side." So it's funny because you can tell that they work together, but they do also, that doesn't mean they don't annoy each other at times. Because Apollo's just like, yeah, I'm a thorn in God's side because I have the statue and it's a reminder that I'm still here no matter what. So yeah. Anyway, I need to move a little faster, but Number 5, how did you become associated with the sun? And I responded, it seems that there's a story behind Apollo's connection with Helios, and I couldn't find a myth where Helios comforts Apollo. I'll have to add a mythology book to my list, because I do have like a worshipping, like a Hellenismos worshipping, but I don't have a straight up like, I think it's Elizabeth Hamilton. Edith Hamilton, that sounds more right. She has a book of mythology, so I'm going to have to look that up. And other books, of course, too. Number 6. How does the duality of your epithets work? Now, epithets aren't something that I was familiar with until I became a witch. Because, again, I was just worshiping this one god, and even he has epithets, even though we don't think of them as epithets. But he says on page 68, if you can harm, you should be able to heal. What you can do, you should be able to undo. You're useless if you can't do that. So it's another one of those where he's a warrior, but he's also a healer. He's a god of medicine. And so, like, just that reminder of that duality. And I just love that if you can, stuttering, if you can hurt, you should be able to heal. She asks how Apollo sees himself. And he says he has some long-held resentments, but he eventually accepted the changes and adapted, just like many others in the book. I have another quote on page 68 for number 8, when Sara asks, how do you want to be seen by others? And again, this was one that I really loved, because, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, even though my art is generally following patterns. He says, as an artist, art is everything. It's easy to get swallowed up by every terrible thing happening in this world, and all the ways we learn what's happening. But it's important to turn away and create something nice. And that's so important, especially right now. Like, the world is so topsy-turvy. I had a conversation on the phone with my dad lately about how just everything is, and then I went home and I watched a show with my husband and I tatted and I felt better for that moment. You know, you're able to step away, and I feel like a lot of us, we have this feeling like we have to be responsible and we have to constantly be watching everything that happens because it feels like a duty. Like, oh, some people don't get to take a break away from this stuff, so we shouldn't be able to, or we shouldn't allow ourselves to, but it's just so unhealthy. And so number 9, last messages for the people, and he says, we need to take a break and create. What's happening in the world, I also wrote, what's happening in the world is important, but so is mental health. And then there's also some foreshadowing. going on. At the end, he's like, he goes away like with this knowing look, and it explains why. So there's definitely some foreshadowing there. My overall impression of Apollo is that he's a god that misses his time when polytheism was the norm, and he's a god that does not take well to slights. Which, to be fair, if someone came to your house and didn't wash their hands before they ate and came and was asking you all these questions and doing so without having done proper research or like learning anything about you first, like, I would be pretty miffed too. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I would be pretty miffed. All right. One more interview, and then we're going to do a tarot reading and call it a day for today. All right, so our last interview is with Persephone. And I have to say, well, I'll get there. I know that I wrote a quote from, so Sara, it starts out with not even talking about Persephone and Persephone's intro. It talks about how she essentially has a come to Jesus moment about how she treated Apollo, and it affected her where it hurts. So it's a reminder that God is in all love and light. She had to learn her lesson about it the hard way, which, fair. Sometimes we all need that. You know, we're human beings, and sometimes we're stubborn. Lord knows I'm stubborn. And she had done this thing, and God was like, if you're going to learn, you're going to learn it. Sometimes you have to be kicked in the butt. And so, like, her videos spread, and she was getting kind of some hateful comments. Some were really constructive, and she even talks about that. This is where she starts actually inviting people who are of the faith or who worship the gods that she is interviewing to come in and do like invocations and like worshiping beforehand to try to make sure that she doesn't have a repeat of Apollo. And again, I appreciate that she learns from her mistakes. She admits that her perspective was the same as many mainstream Christians who thought they could ignore or even demean any divinity that isn't Adonai, isn't God. And like I said, it's the first interview where she invites a worshiper of the deity she's inviting to do an invocation for her. Yeah, anyway. So the first question was, how do you feel about being in full bloom? And she said she enjoys being in the present. The impression I get from the other interviews is that there is love between her and Hades, but spring is where she really belongs. Like she says, it's where I spent, on page 73, it's where I spent my beginning days, and I don't want to think about what will happen later in the year. So, again, that death in the maiden trope is hard to let go of sometimes. So it's like, you can imagine them pining over each other, and I imagine that there is some of that too, but she's happy when she's gone from him. She's happy in her role as the goddess of spring. Another question about epithets. How do your epithets help people understand you? And you see this a lot, like some gods and other pantheons, they have multiple roles, and they take on multiple forms that have different names, and epithets kind of serve the same purpose in Greek mythology. She has different roles that help her followers with specific issues. So she might come in a different form with a different epithet if you're needing one thing versus another thing. And I talked about this last week too. Number 3, is there any one correct version of your myths? And she basically says no, it's not so much the specificity of it. There's an expression, the devil's in the details. And what she's basically saying is that the details aren't really what's important. It's the moral of the story that really is important, that you really need to listen to. And I said these myths were oral, written down by people who wanted to use the stories for a certain purpose. The moral of the story is the point, not the specifics. So, again, just like with Hades, while I was reading this interview, I had Hades Town playing in my brain. Question number 4 was, why wasn't Orpheus allowed to take his wife home? Which is a sad story. And I wrote, poor boy working on a song. Sorry. If it's a reference, it's such a good musical. You should listen to it. Not even the most heartfelt devotion or love or most beautiful song can change life and death. Now, there are a few exceptions, but in general, the gods are not going to change the order of life and death just because it affects things too much. Like, there's a natural order to things, and the gods are just as responsible for keeping that natural order as they are for anything else. Which is hard to think about if you have a loved one who's passed on. Like, you want them back, but you have to remember, like, it's not because the gods necessarily want to cause you pain so much as just that's just how the world works, and it sucks, but that's just how the world works. So the next one I had to research again. I love Greek mythology, but this was one I had never heard of before, or I had not remembered this name before, because I'd heard the story about Theseus, but I had not really remembered his friend's name. So, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, so I apologize in advance. The question was thoughts on Pirithous' antics. So I had to Google it. Pirithous was a companion to Theseus and a Greek king. They both vowed to marry daughters of Zeus. Pirithous decided on Persephone, and he and Theseus went to the underworld to kidnap her. Like, think about this. Think about this from a modern perspective. We both decide, you and your friend decide to marry King Charles's granddaughters, or what have you. Or King Charles, anyway. Decide to marry a king's daughters. And one of you is like, oh, I'm going to go to this unattached lady over here. And then the other one's like, I'm going to marry the queen of another country who is married to someone else. That is what he's doing. He decided on Persephone, and they were captured and punished by the Furies until Heracles rescued Theseus, but they left Pirithous behind. And Persephone just thought what he did was foolish. Like, she knew it was coming. It wasn't going to happen, but I think that's kind of hysterical. Like, let me go into this king's castle, kidnap his queen, and then expect nothing to happen. Sounds like a ding-dong. Anyway, number 6. Persephone says, or Sarah asks, how do you see yourself? And Persephone doesn't really try to be poetic or offer deep insight. She's just like, I'm me. I'm the goddess of spring and the goddess of the underworld. I'm both. Or the queen of the underworld. And this is where I get in my feelings a little bit. How do you want others to see you? And she's basically like, I want to be seen as independent from my husband. I have my own things to offer. I am my own person, or my own goddess. And we really do. It's really hard to talk about Persephone without talking about Hades. Like, it's really hard because Hades is, the king of the underworld. Their story is one of the most famous myths in all of Greek mythology. So it's really hard to separate the two of them. But it's clear that, like, she wants to be seen as her own deity. And so I don't know about her, or I don't know about others, but I'm going to try my hardest to try to respect that, And then, of course, I say that, and then my next question is, she asks if there are any, Sarah asks if there are any last messages for herself or or Persephone's followers. And like Hades, Persephone reminds us that we shouldn't romanticize stories just to make them palatable, and she sees that as an injustice. Again, something every person who loves that death and the maiden trope is guilty of. Sara, and then moving forward from that, Sara asks Zeus if she can speak with others in the Greek pantheon, and he says no. Just flat out, no thank you. No, don't do that. And then she asks Jupiter the same thing, and Jupiter's like, no. Mm-mm. So that was the last of the Greek and Greco-Roman pantheon. Page 79. I was there suddenly, or no, that's not where. These gods were gods, divinity, not fallen angels or demons, or whatever else my ignorant fellows in faith insulted these beings with. Nor were they the great spirits I'd thought they were up to that point, because if I learned anything through this fun exercise of humility, it was that entities that serve as gods deserve and will demand to be respected as gods, no matter what religious framework I'm coming from. And I think that's something we need to remember, and I think that's something Christians, especially, like, when I say Christians, I'm talking about, like, evangelical, mainstream Christians really need to remember, is because they will call you out for it, and they will not sometimes be kind. Depends on the deity you get, but if you get the wrong deity and you try to insult them, like, they're not going to be kind about it. So yeah, my overall impression of Persephone, she seems kind and peaceful with a core of steel. Like, she's got that goddess of springtime kind of ephemeral nature to her, but she's still absolutely the queen of the underworld. But yeah, so those were the 4 interviews today. Next week, what we'll do is we will go from Lucifer through Archangel Raphael. We're starting to get into more of the Christian side of things in this book. Some of these interviews are really, really interesting, especially like me, if you're like a Christopagan. And again, I'm super excited in a couple weeks whenever we'll get to Judas's interview, because I am so curious how that goes. But as for now, as always, you can follow me on Blue Sky or Twitter at A Witch's Yarn. I'm on Twitter also at A Witch's Yarn. You can email me, awitchesyarn@gmail.com. It's all without an apostrophe because they don't like apostrophes in those things. But yeah, I'm at all of those places. I would love to hear from you. If you like this podcast, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast listening done. I would just absolutely love to hear from you. Our card for the week is, again, I'm using the Hobbit Tarot. 10 of Swords. Let's see. Let's find it in my little booklet. Boop, boop, boop. Ace of Swords. We're getting there. 6, 8, 10. So it says, go along with major changes and turn them to your advantage. A turning point becomes a revelation into life itself. The impact of this card is like a complete ending of a cycle of life, so be prepared to make sacrifices in order to break through. On the other hand, this phase is coming to an end and your fortunes are about to improve. So again, just kind of like last week, where it was like, you're going to face some hardships. Use them to your advantage. Use them to grow yourself. Use them to see yourself in a better light and find the opportunities that come with the changes that you're about to face. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, again, reach out to me on my social medias. I would love to hear from you. Next week, we will be, again, from Lucifer to Raphael. And I guess I'll hear from you next week. Bye, friends.